Okay. So we're going to basically conclude the sugya of makif chaverim b'gimel chaysav. There's a few things I kept on wanting to say and I keep on forgetting. First of all, I saw in the Maram and the Rashi and others, the taka is two gersayis, meaning not just having, like our Gemara has two lishnas. There's taka two gersayis according to some, and I think the Rashi even uses the lashon girsas Rashi, like garas Rashi. As in Rashi has one version with taka only one. That's one thing I wanted to say. There's another thing. Can't remember. Anyway. This is what I wanted to say. So before we go to Tosafos, I want to go back to the Mukha Yosef for a second because I noticed one difference between the Mukha Yosef and Tosafos, and then I was learning Tosafos today, I realized another difference, and that clarified for me why the Mukha Yosef said that Yod al Yona. So the Mukha Yosef from the Ramban was asking why B'chlal are we making the guy pay when it's 4? If, as Rashi says, and he says, it's a makam shenagor shalom ligder, or makam, there's no minig, which is essentially the same thing as shalom ligder. And then, all of a sudden, because I put 4 walls around him, now all of a sudden he has to pay. It doesn't seem right. Seeming the takana is no minig. So the Rashba answered by saying, the Rabban answered, quoted in the Mukha Yosef, by saying, that this is like a din of Yoyed l'toich sadach shechaveroi, shaloi b'rishos, v'nata. And the person, he planted a vineyard, and the owner didn't protest. So shaman levi yod al yona. So the reason why it's yod al yona, here's the key word. He treats it as sada asuya lita. There in Bava Metzia there, the Gemara brings 2 cases. There's what seems to be machlekes Rav and Shmuel. And the Gemara says, not a machlekes, kan the makim, kan the sada soyolita, and kan the sada she'ena soyolita. In other words, like this: if it's a kind of field that's not meant to have a vineyard, and then I went ahead and made a vineyard without the guy's permission, then when they calculate paying me back for my expenses, then my hand is I have the lower hand, because this is not the kind of field which is meant to have this kind of gain, and therefore either I get paid back the haitzah, my expenditure, or I get paid back the increase in value. Whichever one of those two is less. That's Yod al Tachtana. But when it's, and this is what the Ramban says here, when it is Hasada Hasoyolita, when it's a field that's supposed to have a vineyard, so then my hand is al yona, because I did what was supposed to happen, and the guy didn't stop me. So the expense I get paid back for is Yod al yona. I'm on the upper hand. And I get back either the full expense or the increase in value, whichever one happens to be higher. Okay, that's what the Rabban is basically saying. Now, we're going to go to Tosafos. Well, we'll keep that in mind as we go to Tosafos now. And we look at Tosafos, we're going to see he learns Pshat almost the exact opposite, and we're going to try to see what the differences are and why they are. So Tosafos, Ta'al Damad Beis, the second Tosafos on the page. Im Amar v'Gadar reviews. He's quoting the Mishnah. After Tanakama said that Amaka v'Shalosh v'Choysa v'Gadar s'Reshenim v'Sashniv v'Shishlisis ein Machav v'Noisai. So Rabbi said, Im Amar v'Gadar s'Revius Megalgan of Sakol, you make him pay for the rest. So says Tosafos, Loigar Sinon. We don't have the word in the Mishnah. Im Amad Nikif, we just started Tosafos Aaron. The second Tosafos on the top of the page. Loigar Sinon, we don't say Im Amad Nikif. The word Nikif is not in the Mishnah. That the guy in the middle got up to build the 4th wall. Why is that? So the Tosafos gives a very pashut cheshbon why the word Nikif can't be there. The halakulu lishya the Gemara. According to all the answers in the Gemara, Koya Makif. We're actually talking about the guy on the outside. When the Gemara goes through the different nafkaminas between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama, whether you're going like Rav Huna which says the nafkamina is that Rabbi Yossi would say you pay half the expenditures, and Tanakama say you pay half of the cheapest version, or whether you go on to the next nafkamina, which is do you pay for the cheap expenditures like Rabbi Chiya, for the half of the cheapest type, or do you pay for the amount it would cost to hire a human scarecrow, or whether you go with the machlekes is on the fourth wall. Either way, in all those lishnas, the person building the fourth wall is the guy on the outside. So therefore, it wouldn't make sense that in our Gemara you add the word nikif. It's only the very last answer, in which Rabbi Yossi is more mekel, where the Tanakama says no matter who built it, whether it's the makif or the nikif, the guy in the middle is mochif to pay. Where Rabbi Yossi says it's nikif, that's the only time where you could limit Rabbi Yossi to nikif. And therefore the word nikif cannot be in the Mishnah. And the Rashbam said the same thing, that you don't put the word nikif, but it's talking about the nikif, as the Gemara is going to say later, meaning the last lishna of the Gemara. Now, if that's the case, so Tosafos says, look, I see that we don't say imam nikif, the halakulu lishna of the Gemara, because according to all the explanations of the Gemara, koya makif, it's actually talking about the guy on the outside who builds the wall. Ba'am lishna Basra, except for the last version. The Ka'amar, where there the last version says that the nafkamina between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama is makif and nikif ikibanayu. But the difference is whether it's the makif or the nikif. That's the only place where Rabbi Yossi limits his din to the nikif. Because up until that point, the din of Rabbi Tanakama or Rabbi Yossi apply both to makif and nikif. And there's other nafkaminas between the two. Now the question is, how did I pick up Perek to that egel? Then why did the Gemara in Bava Kama, which we learned, where there the Gemara in Bava Kama is discussing, you'll remember, the din of Zednan of Ezel Chaser, where one person gains from somebody else's work, but the person who did the work didn't lose anything. And that's like our case, where the guy on the outside built the wall to his own benefit. So he lost nothing by putting up the wall. And the guy in the middle is enjoying of that wall. And the Gemara was trying to prove from here that you're potter. What's the raya you're potter? Because the only time you're chayiv is when you yourself built that fourth wall. And that's what the Gemara asks. That's what Tosafos now asks. How did I Perek to that I go, time of the nikif, ha makif potter. So if so, the Gemara points out over there that our Mishnah, the din of Rabbi Yossi, is limited to when the guy on the inside builds it. Whereas L'chura, Tosafos just pointed out correctly that out of the four versions, only one of them says it's nikif. In every other version, it doesn't matter who builds it. It says Tosafos hainu lahu lishna. So the Gemara in Bava Kama is only following the final version in our Gemara. So it's not unusual that a Gemara earlier references the Gemara later, meaning it's Bava Kama comes before Bava Basra. And it's not unusual that a Gemara earlier will reference a Gemara later. Because as you know, the Gemara was not written like a normal work from beginning to end. It's a conglomerate of conversations that kept on getting added and added and added. So the Gemara will constantly refer to discussions it will have later. But nonetheless, it's still interesting that the Gemara doesn't make reference to it, because a lot of times the Gemara's language will be, sometimes the Gemara will quote the Mishnah Zaraya, and then the Gemara will say, V'havinan ba, and we've come to the conclusion based on that Mishnah, referencing its own analysis, the Gemara's own analysis somewhere else. They'll use that language. Whereas the Mishnah, Bava Kama seems to like, just the Chatchila say it, the Mishnah is talking about the Nikif. Like upon them, the less Breda, we have no choice. We have to say that the Gemara and Bava Kama is, the comments are limited to that final Mishnah. Unless the Gemara is alluding to the fact that that final Mishnah is actually the halacha. Maybe. Although that's not the case, because actually we pass like Rav Huna anyway. And these different Mishnahs are according to Rav Chiyə. We pass like Rav Huna that you pay the expense, not half of the cost. Okay. Next Tosafos, Dmei Kanim B'Zoil. Now here's the Tosafos where it becomes different than the Ramban that we learned yesterday in the Mukha Yosef. So Rav Chiyə said that when Rabbi Yossi says Hakoil, when Rabbi Yossi says Magalgal Hakoil, you make him pay for all four walls. So Rav Chiyə said that's talking about Dmei Kanim B'Zoil, you're making him pay for half of the cheapest type of wall. Says Tosafos, if so, why is this different than a field in which it's not appropriate to plant a vineyard, that if someone came to my field and planted, without my permission, both Rav and Shmuel agree in the Gemara Bava Mitzia that we calculate how much he spent. The Yad and his hand is on he has the lower hand. So in other words, like this. Tosafos is asking, I'll explain the question, I'll tell you my problem with the question. I guess when we're done with the answer. Let's just see Tosafos' question. Tosafos is asking, the halacha is in Bava Mitzia that if I have a field where it's not appropriate it's not the kind of field that's meant to have a vineyard, and someone comes into my field and makes a vineyard. Now, he increased the value of my property, even though it's not the kind of value that's supposed to be for this property. So I have to pay him back for his expense because I didn't stop him. Had I stopped him, okay, I don't have to pay for expense. But I didn't stop him. I watched him. I didn't protest. So I have to pay him back for the expense that he invested in planting vineyard in my field. Now, there are two ways to calculate that expense, either by how much he spent or by how much the value of the field is increased. What am I paying him back for? So because this is the kind of field that's not supposed to have a vineyard, I give him the lesser of the two, whichever one's less. If the increase in value is less, I pay him that. If his investment is less, I pay him that. So Tosafos is asking, because over here, l'chor, this is the basis of his question. Because over here it's a bika, and a bika we already established is not supposed to have a wall, and then this guy came into my field and did build a wall. So now he's increasing the value of my property, yes, but inappropriately, because it's not the kind of place it's meant to have a wall. Now, if that's the case, I, the guy on the inside, should calculate how much either my value is increased or how much he spent and give him the lesser of the two. Why am I giving him a flat rate of half of what a cheap wall would cost? I should be giving him the least of either the expense of what he spent or the lesser, or the value of how much my field was increased, whichever one of the two is less. This is Tosafos' question.
A field that is not meant for planting, it's dafka karim, or it can also be lanis.
I think it could be any, meaning so long as the value I've added is not meant for that kind of property. I think lita is just an example. I don't mean it's limited to lita, like the tia. Okay. So this Tosafos isn't answering. The answers to shiny hacha. Our case is different than an ordinary case of someone increasing the value of my field inappropriately. Why? The matzi amarle, because I can tell the guy, even though you talk increase the value of my field inappropriately, but I would go for a wall that's worth 1 zuz, which means it's even less than a cheap wall. Or maybe he means paying a guy. I don't think he means paying a guy, because that's a agar and a tira. I think he means Pasha building a even cheaper than a cheap wall, like just something for a zuz. Like I don't care enough for this value to say that I should be paying for half of anything. Mamish just a littlest amount. Fine. Now, if that's the case, then why am I paying to make Kanim Bozil? Then maybe that's all I should pay. All I should pay is a zuz. Then the zuz for the cheapest protection. Why am I paying Bechlau for to make Kanim? Why am I paying for the expense of the cheap sticks, which seems to be even more than the Netira Bar Zuzah? Right? So you're stuck in the middle, or Tosafos is stuck in the middle. If it's not like if it is like a inappropriate increase in my value, then calculate the expense or the increase and pay him the least of the two. Now, if I can get away with something even less than that, even less than half of a cheap wall, then why am I paying for half of a cheap wall? In other words, what Tosafos is saying is, in this case, there's a third consideration, which is not that I pay for your expense, not that I pay for a theoretical expense, meaning a cheap wall, not that I pay for how much my values increased, but I pay for what I would have paid for had you not done my thing to get the same value, which is netzida bar zuzah, just something for a zuz, which is a tiny amount. So Bazoi, why Taka is Rabbi saying you pay even for to make Konim Bazoi? Why are you even paying for the amount of half of a cheap wall? Says Tosafos, Danan Sadi, because we, the courts, we the Dayanim, testify. He's claiming that I would have been happy to have this cheap wall, this very cheap wall worth a zuz. So we are witnesses that had he had that, he would have done it. And because he did it, it's because he can't. That's what it seems to me that Tosafos is saying. I want to see, I should have looked at this earlier, but I want to see.
Who is the witnesses?
Anansad is an expression to say that us, the court, we testify. Meaning we are certain of ourselves to say that if he could, he would have done that. Okay, I want to see how Rabbi, should have done this earlier, but I want to see how Rabbi, what's it, new? Tokarski from Tosafos in English, how he translates this. Let's see. I have a lot of questions on this Tosafos. Maybe I should have looked earlier. He's saying no, different. Okay, if he could find this Kanim. Yeah. In other words, we're saying that so right now, he doesn't have the cheaper version of a wall. He doesn't have the Mekanim Bazal. Right now, he has a fancy wall that the neighbor built. So we are saying that if he could have got a Mekanim Bazal, he would have done it. And therefore, we're making him pay for that. Even though theoretically, there's an even cheaper version, which is the Netzida Bar Zuzah. But in other words, we come to a certain decision that any person would pay up to a certain amount to have his property properly fenced in, even if it's not the cheapest. There's a certain amount of money that a person would pay to have something decent. And he'll pay for half of that, even though it's not the absolute cheapest, and even though it's not as much as the fancy wall that the neighbor actually built. This is what Tosafos is saying. But yet, because there is a theoretical option of an even cheaper version, it doesn't count as the same halacha of someone who's going to somebody else's field and increasing the property inappropriately. In which case, the halacha is, you look at the cheapest of the two, either the increase in value versus the expense that the other guy did. Okay, is the Tosafos clear before I start asking my questions, or not really?
So we're basically defining the cheaper, that the shvach would be at least this. This would be the minimum of the shvach, that he would pay that amount, or no?
Flesh that out, because I think that's the same question I have. Flesh out your question.
That if he would have, that the Mekanim Bazul, that's the increase in value would be that, basically.
No. So follow through. That's my biggest question here. Tosafos is asking, why is it not like the din of someone who came into my field and did it inappropriately, in which case you measure how much the expenses are versus how much the increase in value is, and you pay the cheaper of the two. No. So in this case, what would be the increase in value and what would be the expense? The guy
if he built a nice, yeah.
The guy built a nice wall, that's the expense. And the increase in value is what?
It should be this, to make Kanim Brazil, no?
No. So where's the question in Tosafos B'chal? That was my first question. So what's Tosafos' problem? He's asking a question, why isn't it like that din? It's exactly like that din. What exactly is the increase in value other than that? That's what I'm not understanding in this whole thing. Like, how would you define the increase in value if not by the cheapest kind of wall? The
Well,
cheapest kind
according
of
to
the cheapest kind of successful wall, not the very cheapest wall, which is like not proper bachlal, because we are anan sadi, we are testifying that a person would pay a certain amount to make this wall better. Is that not the definition of the increased value of the property? I'm not understanding this question, bachlal. Yes, I don't know the answer to the question because that is my question.
unless the Tosafos is, it's a question if you could argue that the increase in value is only this natira bar zuzah.
That can't be. And Tosafos would say he should pay he should pay that. Oh. But Anan Sadi. No, I'll tell you why it's not true. Because if we are testifying that a person would pay to have his wall properly built by Bekon and Bozil, that means when I want to resell it, a buyer, also a non-Sadi, that a buyer would pay the increased amount to have that extra wall. Meaning the same non-Sadi we say about him, we say about buyers also. Meaning the value goes up either way, based on the Bekon and Bozil. Because a non-Sadi, that's what a person would pay for. No? It's a very puzzling thesis.
That's the answer.
It's not the answer. The answer is that it's not the same thing as a case of Natiya. Why is not the same case as Natiya? Because there's a third option. But the third option we ruled out anyway. It's schwer to me. I'm just going to pile on more questions, and I'll tell you, like, I'm not sure. Why is this question dafka on Rav Chiyə Dmei Kana B'Zoil? Why isn't this question on Rav Huna, which says you pay the full expense? If anything, that's what the real question is. In the case, according to Rav Huna, you're paying the full half of the full expense the guy spent. Is that not where your question should be? Why isn't Rav Chiyə to make Kana B'Zoil? Why is that Dibra Maschel? Right? Why is Dafka to make Kana B'Zoil?
That's to make Kana B'Zoil, that's
Rav Chiyə. Rav Chiyə is Taich and Rabbi Yossi. That when Rabbi Yossi says Megalgal Vasakol, he means make Kana B'Zoil. Whereas Rav Huna said, what's the Lashon? Hakol Fi Mashagadar. He paid for the actual cost of what the guy spent. L'chora Tosafos' question belongs more to Rav Huna than Rav Chiyə. Right? So I'm not sure.
In that section of the Gemara, in that piece, it's discussing what's the definition that we require him to pay.
Right, but it's machlokes. You have Rav Huna a line before. Rav Huna Amar Hakol Mifash Gadar. חייא Barav Amar Hakol Mifash B'Zal. And Tosafos asked the question not on Rav Huna's statement, but on Rav Chiyə Barav's statement. Why? Not sure.
Well, once you've begun to discuss how do you define it, what he spent, what the expense was.
Yeah, finished.
Or according to make Kana B'Zal, we say no, he's going to pay the least amount.
No.
So now I have a question. Why are we going to say that? We're going
He's
define...
asking about what you're saying. If that's the case, there's questions on the Mishnah, not even on the two opinions in the Gemara. There's questions on the Mishnah. Megalgal Vasakol, question. Why is it not like a sadas she'ena seyalita? That if that's the case, that his dibra maskal should be megalgal Vasakol. Because either way, it doesn't make a difference how you type it. The same question applies. He waits all the way to make Kana B'Zal to ask the question.
Because that introduces, that's the doorway to say, well, so now we're going to define, is it the most expensive, or the least expensive, is it hand on ayena v'tachfeina? So why not present the argument exactly like it is over there?
But why isn't that a question right at the beginning? Right from the Mishnah. Why isn't the Mishnah treating it that way? Unless you want to say that Megalgal Vasakol means to pay like a Sada She'ena to a Soyalita. And that's what Megalgal Vasakol means. That still doesn't explain why it doesn't ask about Rav Huna.
Yeah, so why can't the question be, instead of introducing it as Mashagadar versus the Mekana Buzil, why don't we just discuss it as we discussed elsewhere, that a field that's not made for planting?
So why is the Masal to make Kana B'Zoil? It's the end of the conversation, not the beginning. Maybe he should have put it by. He should have said Itmar v'chulu and then asked this question.
Well, his question is on the definition of to make Kana B'Zoil at the end of the day.
No, it's
right?
not. It's the question of the definition of to make Kana B'Zoil. His question is on why you're paying that.
Right. He's saying don't pay.
The same question applies. Why aren't you paying Akol Mashagadar? Why is the same question not applied to that? I think it does.
He's saying that instead of paying to make Kana B'Zoil, pay a zuz, material bar zuzah.
That's his answer already. Because I could have got away with a zuz, therefore you can't compare it to the shvach versus the hitzah of natiyim of sadash ena toyolita.
It's not the answer.
That is the shiny hacha. The matziyama leil disagi ben tir bazuz. That's why you can't compare it, and that's why you can't compare it to a sadash ena toyolita. Because I have an alternative to your actions. Whereas in the other case, I don't have any alternative. You planted my field. What am I going to say? Planted in a cheaper version? Planting is planting. Over here, I'm saying you could have done it. I would have done it in a cheaper version. But nonetheless, we don't make it pay to have a cheaper version. Like, it's very strange. So the Ramban, as we saw, avoided the whole thing because he says this is considered a sada sha'asuyalita. Right? The Ramban said that this is considered a sada sha'asuyalita. And because it's a sada sha'asuyalita, therefore, yad al yoina, the guy who put the expenditures out. And this is his answer to explain why he's paying for the fourth wall. The big kash on the Ramban is, though, I think the big question is the Ramban limiting his din to Rav Huna? Because if Ramban is comparing this to a case of sada suyalita, and the din is yod al yoina, which means he pays for the higher of the two, whether the hitzah or the expenditure. And in this case, that would mean pay for half of the hitzah, which is exactly what Rav Huna said. So how does that explain for Rabbi Xiyə? Rabban seems to be limiting himself to Rav Huna by saying that it's exactly like sada sha'asuyalita, and therefore yad al yoina. Unless yad al yoina means he gets more than the increased value, but half of what the cheapest version is, it's missing something.
Ramban you're saying he's avoiding this. How's he avoiding the issue?
Well, because he's arguing with Tosafos. Tosafos is saying, first of all, asks, why don't we compare it? Tosafos' premise is that a wall is completely inappropriate here. And therefore his question is, why are we not treating it like a sada she'ena to a sayalita? And the Ramban says, what are you talking about? A wall is totally appropriate here. The Ramban says, so he changes his understanding. Tosafos says, it's not mahal appropriate here. And then he asks, why is it not like a sada she'ena toyolita? Ramban says, it is appropriate to have a wall here, which is why you're paying for the fourth, even though it's a makom she'nagol shalei there. And then my question on the Ramban is, how does that work with Rabbi Xiyə? Because the din by the sada suyalita, the din is yad al yoina, which means you pay for at least half of the expenditure, if not even more. You pay for the actual increase of value. If the increase of value happens to be more, so that's in line with Rav Huna, not Rav Xiyə. So how does the Ramban explain the Gemara according to Rav Xiyə? Why aren't you paying? Why aren't you paying hakol l'fi mashagadar, which is yad al yoina? He's paying for the hitzah. I don't have clarity on this. I thought about it today, and I'm not sure. I have to look in the Achronim, which I couldn't get a chance to do. To see how they teach this stuff. Ich weiß nicht. Anything?
I'm still catching up to understand the Ramban properly.
Okay, let's have a look at that. The Ramban began with the question of why Bechlal are we making him pay when he builds the fourth wall? L'chura, it's a makom shenagush leligda, which means I can go ahead and avoid or undermine the takanas chachamim that there is no geder by a bika if I just walk to someone else's field, build four walls, and I just undermine the whole takana, forcing him to pay. Why is that? So says the Ramban, because it's a sada shasayolita. It's appropriate to have a wall around your field or a fence. So even though it's not a makom where you can compel me, but lapayol, once I go, if I'm only on one side of you, so I didn't increase the value by putting the fence. I didn't do anything to you because you still have the other three sides open. Right? But if I did all four sides, so now it's not a question of privacy or not privacy. It's a question of the fact that I made your field appropriately more valuable because I gave it a fence. Right? That's what the Ramban's answer is. Now my question to the Ramban is, okay, so let's follow through. What's the din in the case when a person builds appropriately increases the value of somebody else's property? Halacha is you got to pay me back, and my hand is al yona, which means you pay me back at the highest rate, either at the rate of how much I increased the value of your property, or at the rate of how much I spent, whichever one's higher. Which is exactly what Rav Huna says. Rav Huna says, when I build four walls around the guy, he's got to pay me back half of what I spent. Whereas Rav Chiya says, no, you pay him back half of the cheapest version of a wall. So that's that opinion that Rav Chiya, which says you pay him back for half of the cheapest version of a wall, how does that fit with the Ramban's din of comparing it to appropriate increase in value? L'chura, if it's appropriate increase in value, it's nisada haruya l'netiya, then pay me back for half of my full expense, not just for cheapest version. Makash is how the Ramban fits with Rabbi Chiya. I have this feeling that all the questions I'm asking are related to one piece of information that I'm missing, and if I somehow got that, all of these questions would fall away. Like, what's the root of this difference between the Ramban and Tosafos? Tosafos sees this as if it's a makom shnagush leligdar, it's a sada she'eina asoyolita. Whereas Ramban says, nonetheless, it's still a sada she'asoyolita. And that's at the core of all these issues here, understanding why that difference. I guess if I understood that properly, I would have the answers to all these questions.
Isn't the way of Rav Chiya learning it basically the same as saying that's the increase in value?
That's my kasha on Tosafos. That was our question on Tosafos, right?
Right.
Which is, you're asking on Rav Chiya, why isn't he treating it like sada she'asoyolita, where he's giving him the lesser of the two? I am giving him lesser of the two. I'm giving him the amount of the increased value, which is the Mekon Bozil. That's my question on Tosafos.
Right. So basically saying that the Ramban cannot explain it according to Rav Chiya because the Ramban is saying it is appropriate.
Exactly. That's my question. Ramban avoided the stira by saying this is one of the cases discussed there. Okay, but then you have to be locked into the din of that case. And you don't have the flexibility the Gemara is giving here. We have different opinions of how you pay. It's even less, because in our Gemara, there's at least according to one opinion, all I pay for is the amount I would be paying for a human scarecrow, which is certainly less than the value increased at the lowest rate.
Right. So as meaning it's comparable, but it's not the same thing. It can be comparable to a field. Right.
Which maybe that's what the Ramban is saying. Because there's precedent. No, because he doesn't say that. He doesn't say because there's precedent. He says very clearly, this is like a sada asuyalita because it's a ruya lakach. It's a ruya lakach to have a wall. He says those words, ruya lakach. So it's hard to say that he's just using it as precedent. Because you see precedent that we pay, make somebody else pay when you increase in value. So that's precedent for here also. It's not what he says. I don't know. I don't have Sorry, say it again.
So the initial lashon is
But keep on going when he's after the parentheses there. Keep on going.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're quoting at the end where it says it's hasiya lita damya.
And he that's what he refers to that. See, the fact that it's makam shenogo, but makam shaloi nogo ligder, that's the Tosafos' premise for saying why it's Sadash Eno Suri Lita. Because it's makam shenogo shaloi ligder. But the Ramban says, Bekol makam roya lakach. Roya v'tzricha lakach, not just roya, tzricha.
Right, so if they're discussing where does he start this?
Oh. Look at that. Okay. So it dawned on me. Look at the Melchemes Hashem on the bottom. You have the page there, or you have a picture?
I have a picture.
Okay, so I'm going to send you a picture now. The Melchemes Hashem. Under the I'm sending it to you on WhatsApp. Under the Rif, you have the Moira Gadol and Melchemes Hashem. And the Melchemes Hashem is written by the Ramban. So I figured, let's look there and see if there's a defense. And the Taka is right. There's a book called there's a sefer. There's a commentary on the Rif called Hamor HaGadol, which is written by Rabbi Xiyə something known as the Razah. Harazah, right? I think that's what it's called. Look at the front here. Yeah, Razah. And then the Melchemes Hashem is the Ramban, which defends the Rif against the Sefer Hamor HaGadol. And the Ramban has another book defending the Ravid's Hasagas. So here in the Melchemes Hashem says the Ramban like this. Right, written by the Ramban, the Melchemes Hashem. Yeah, the Ramban. Okay, sorry, it's part of a longer arichas here. I'm not going to go there. But let's just see. V'hainu plukta dameroi, the Gemara. Yeah, because this is our issue. Mar Omar HaKol F'Mashagadar. Rav Huna, who says you pay for half the expense of what the guy actually the guy actually put out. Why? Shestam sada asui ligdar yafa. A field is meant to be properly fenced, and therefore shaman we calculate how much either the value is or how much the expense was. And the guy who built the wall, he has the upper hand. I can't say take away your stuff. I'll do myself. Go away. I don't want your expense. Too bad. Because it's meant to be there. You can't say such a thing. Okay. So this is like Rav Huna, as we're assuming from the Ramban quoted in the book of Yosef, that and you give him everything. Now comes a question with Rabbi Xiyə. Rabbi Xiyə says, you give him the Mekanim of Bozel. You give him the cheaper wall. Half of the cheaper wall. Now, according to at least one of the lishnas in the Gemara, Latana Kama, right? Because Rav Xiyə and Rav Huna are arguing about Rav Yossi, who said, Hakoil. What's Pshat in Hakoil? And Rav Xiyə said it means Mekanim Bozel. So says the Ramban, Melchemes Hashem, Latana Kama, Demei, Netura. And according to Tanakama, in that Iboy Sema, you give him the amount of cost to pay for a human scarecrow. So what is this? So Kasavar, this Rabbi Xiyə is of the view that Stam Soda Eina Ligdar Binyan. Look at the binyan. A regular field is not meant for a built fence. El Shomer. A Stam Asuya is meant for a Shomer. Oil Legeder Konim. Shegodr Bahen. or a cheap fence when he finds them available. And therefore, have the and that's machlekes taka. And therefore, take away your stuff. I'm not interested in your benefits. Like the Rif Taka said, like I think Rabbi means a Rif. That's what it's meant for.
What's Yaris?
Destroy them. You destroy the property and go take your stuff. Take it away. Not interested in your stuff, in your benefits. So this is talking about machlekes. This is beautiful then. He answers all of our questions. Even our question on Tosafos, he incorporates his answer. Our question on Tosafos, that is not the cheaper version. Is that not Yad al Tachtoina? Says that Rabban, yes, it is, and it's exactly Rabbi's opinion. And Rav Huda's opinion is that it's Mekonim, that it's Yad al Yona because it's a Soyolita. Punkt. So he takes our questions and makes it machlekes. Resolves all the problems.
That's the direction I was heading.
Sorry?
That's the direction I was heading. I wasn't there yet, but it was.
Yeah, this is where we were going. This is certainly where we were thinking, but now you see it written. It's good.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, at least we have a mahalach here, even if we can't resolve Tosafos. Okay, he goes on to explain all the various different lishnas in the Gemara. Anyway, that's the basic premise.
But that explains why Tosafos asked the question here, right?
So I was thinking that. So let's think. Let's walk that through. So, in other words, let's say Tosafos accepts the premise that Rav Huna is treating it like Sada Soyalita. And therefore he's asking about Rav Chiya, L'chora, since you're not paying yet the highest rate, which means you don't believe that it's a Sada Aruy Lakach. Because if you believe it's a Sada Aruy Lakach, you would make it pay the highest expense. So you, Rav Chiya, are not making him pay the highest expense, which means you don't treat it like a Aruy Lakach. You're treating it She'ein Aruy Lakach. And if you're treating it She'ein Aruy Lakach, L'chora, you should be paying less than even to make kind of Bozel. Maybe Taka, that's Tosafos' question. And that would explain Taka why Tosafos is asking it by Rav Chiya and not by Rav Huna. Because in Rav Huna, you could Taka say, he's of the opinion, Yad al Yaina. Because it's Rui Lakach. But this is very good. This is very good. It still doesn't explain, though, what's Pshat in Tosafos' answer. Because I could say that I would go with even a cheaper version. Right. Because if the din by Yad al Tachtoina is that I can take your stuff and throw it out, so I can still do that. Because I could say I'm going to give it cheaper. So comes Rav Chiya and says, no, Taka true, you can do that. But in this scenario, we are anan sadi that most people, if they can get a proper wall for a cheap price, they'll take it. And maybe Tosafos' answer is, and because anan sadi, therefore that is considered the shvach, which Yad al Tachtoina. And therefore in other words, the answer may be not to come to say why it's not like the case of us She'ein Asur Lita, but the answer is coming to explain why it is. Is that what you were saying earlier? So the language shiny hacha doesn't apply. The language shiny hacha seems to say that it's different. That this is not a case of this is not a case of She'ein Asur Lita. The shiny hacha is different here. Why different? Why do they make it different? Because I can throw out your stuff and say I have a cheaper version of it. But nonetheless, comes Rav Chiya and says no. Even though it's not talking, What do you say?
Here it's different that there's here Shani Hacha, it's different.
Yeah.
That the shvach of the increase in value is variable. It's subjective. You say, I just want to do a
Becomes
zuz,
the
whatever
answer
it
and
is.
says it isn't subjective because an ansadi.
Yeah, that's the ultimate answer. But the first answer,
which means it's not shiny in the end.
it's shiny, but then comes the Rabbanan and they say no, Anani.
The language is very shvach. The language is shvach. I like the pshat, but it doesn't. The language doesn't jive with me. In other words, it says Oimari could have been the Enochanami. Should have said Enochanami. The Afagav the Oimerloi. With the Sagali, but the Terbazoza, Mikomakoim. You could have said Enochanami. And it would have flowed
Shani
no.
Here it's different.
But nonetheless, he could have said if we were right, he could have said Oimari the Enochanami.
But that's what he does say.
He should have said Enochanami, not Shani Hacha. Enochanami, Taka is like that case. Now, Afagav the Amarle.
It's not like that case. It's not like that case.
But it is, because the poil it is. Anan Sadi makes it like that case, no? The way we're learning it now.
If it's like that case, like if it's like that case, so you're saying it would say Enochanami, it wouldn't say Shani Hacha, it would say yeah. And so he could pay the shvach, and the shvach is whatever it is. It's
the shvach is Nikar Bazo, because Anan Sadi.
Yeah. No, I don't need the Anan Sadi unless it's Shani Hacha.
But no, I can't. Okay, explain what you mean.
That Shani Hacha here, it's different. That it's variable and subjective. He's going to say, I need a scarecrow. I'm going to pay only a zuz.
Okay.
And he has an argument. Yeah. Okay. So it's different. It's not fixed. It's not a fixed amount because each person can protect his property with whatever minimum he wants to.
Yeah.
So that's why it's Shani Hacha.
And comes Mikol Mokim to say.
Says that's true. Mikol Mokim. Anan Sahadi, we're going to testify and come in and make almost like a takana. Like, no, the takana is based on the logic that he would pay this price if he could get it at that price.
Yeah.
But it's like a takana. You need to pay this amount. You need to pay the king.
Is that the Shmei Shvach?
Yes.
It is the Shmei Shvach. So the Mikol Mokim restores it to being the same case as Yad Alai Tachayna.
Right, but it's not just a straight line.
So I'm saying I could have done that. I could have written it much more clearly. Could have said Enochanami, but
then you wouldn't. But then you lose the point. And
he'd make the point even better. He'd make the point very straight out. It's taka like that. Now, even though he has an argument that it's a variable, Anan Sadi it's not variable.
Which you can only say like this way.
It would be a straight line.
But it's not a straight line.
He could have made it a straight line. If I
make it a straight line, then I lose some of the argument here. Like I'm losing that.
Afagav the Matzi Amalei, because we anyways negate his Matzi Amalei. Besides being negated in Matzi Amalei. But in other words, Shani Hacha makes it seem like the Matzi Amalei is valid. But Mikol Mokim, we're stuck with this other thing called Anan Sadi. As opposed to the way we're learning it, the Anan Sadi is the beef of the answer. The variable is like is the thing that we have to avoid. I don't love the language if this is the Taka the right shot.
Yeah, but it's
it could work. I could squeeze it, but I'm not I much prefer glatt language.
If the language is glottic, then you're losing the point of it being variable.
Why? Introducing by Afagav makes it lose the lust of the argument. I don't know.
Here it's different. Shani Hacha. You can meaning if we don't answer.
Lapoil our non-sadi restores it to not being different. He should have said Afagav. Even though it's different here, nonetheless, we still say it's the same. That word Afagav should have been there. Because he's negating it. Lapoil is negating the shine. If we're learning correctly, then the Lapoil is gaining the difference. He's retracting the variable. In which case, the variable should have been introduced with Afagav. Even though there's a variable, I'm retracting it. But he doesn't say that. He substantiates the variable, and it's a true variable. But
Because you would
nonetheless,
be
going to make you pay more.
You can retract the variable only when it's all based on svara. Here, it's not only based on svara. At the end, you can say anan sahadi.
Anan sahadi is a svara, because we know people by and large would do that.
You support the anan sahadi has a spark to support it, like as an asmachta, but I don't. But nonetheless, anan sahadi, that's the bottom line.
Unless this is what I was thought before I read it by Pekarsky. I was saying that anan sahadi is not talking about the Meikon and Bozel. It's talking about the Netir Bazuza. If he were able to get Netir Bazuza, he would have done it. And the fact that he never did is because he couldn't. And if he can't, that's why we're going to make him pay for the actual Meikon and Bozel that are available. And don't give me a hypothetical that you're okay with the Netir Bazuza. Because if you could have got that, you would have. That's what I thought Taisus meant, l'chatchila. Maybe you can still learn that way. And how does that help us?
That he wouldn't, that since he didn't get...
Yeah, don't claim me that you could have got such a cheap a thing. You would have gotten it if you could have.
And then, therefore?
And therefore, we're going to go not to what you claim hypothetically you could have been the cheapest one, but to what the actual cheapest one is. It still doesn't answer the issue of why is that not the shvach? It still doesn't answer that problem I have. But at least it makes the language a little better. Because otherwise the language, it's strange. It's different because the whole thing is mudna. Before you get to the answer of shiny, what would have been the din had this been, in Tosafos' view, what would have been the din had it been a sada she'ena soyalita? Why isn't it a sada she'ena soyalita? Okay, what would be the din if it was a sada she'ena soyalita? What would I pay? Fine. So we evaluate how much the increase in value of the field is. We evaluate how much the other guy spent, and we go over the least of the two. No, so what would I pay? What's the problem? That's my main question with Tosafos. Even after with the Rabban, even though we settled at least the Chura why Tosafos is asking on Reb Xiyə, not Rav Huna. Okay, but I still don't understand the etzem question, which is why I think that's why we're struggling with the answer, because we don't know the etzem question. If we knew the etzem question, then maybe we would have an answer. Because we lechatchila read like the Ramban that the shvach, which is yad al tachtoina, is to make kanim bozil. Or if you're Tanakama, you would say it's a human scarecrow. But we're talking about Rabbi now because Rabbi is Taichi Rabbi. So it is to make kanim bozil. That is the shvach of the yad al tachtoina. Good. But Tosafos is saying it's not that. So what is the din in Tosafos? If we were to stick with Tosafos' question, and as long as we can't answer that question, we're not going to really properly understand Tosafos' answer because I don't understand the decimal question. That's where I'm stuck. This is why I'm stuck.
So what does Pekarsky say on the question?
Let's have a look. We'll look at the. That's the other one. Now look at Pekarsky. We'll see. Where is it? Okay. You may ask, why is this case different from a field that is not intended for planting trees? Okay, yeah. If his friend planted it without permission from the owner, Rav and Shmuel rule in Perek HaShayil that we assess for the planter the value of the improvement of the field as opposed to his expenses for improving the field, and his hand is on the bottom. He is in a weakened position, i.e., the planter receives payment for the owner from the lesser of the two. If the expenses are less than the improvement, he only receives the expenses, and vice versa. The owner must pay regardless, since he derived benefit from someone's expense. We see that in this case, in the case of planting, the owner must pay at least for the lesser of the two, either for the expenses or the improvement. The same should apply in the case of the Vow Mishnah with the fencing. Why is it that the owner has to pay to make kanim bozil, which is less than either the improvement or the expenses? Why is it less than the improvement? Why is it less than the improvement? He assumes it's less than the improvement. And Tosafos' answer is, this is the way he teaches the answer. And the answer is, because I could have gone away with the Tid Bar Zuzah, therefore the owner's improvement is only a Zuz. Unless Tosafos is assuming the Shvach is equal to the cost of the wall, because if I were to resell the property, no, because I don't own the wall. The Nikif doesn't own the wall. Why is he so sure that Dmei Kohen Bozel is less than the improvement? Why is he so sure of that? That's where I'm stuck.
So
why is it less than the improvement? That's the premise of Tosafos' question. And the answer is, my improvement is less because I could have gotten the Tina Bazuzah. I have to see more of the Achronim. The truth is, I guess Rabbi Pekarsky would have brought the Achronim if there were. And I'm very happy that I saw the Ramban because it validates my question on Tosafos. Because the Ramban Taka learns like our question. I don't know. What do you say?
There's because the Gemara says Lefima Shegader. So Lefima Shegader.
That's Rav Huna's opinion.
The Ika Benitana Kamal Rabbi say Tana Kamal Savar
That's Rav Huna.
Hakol.
That's in Rav Huna. El Chibarav. That's where you get all different lishness. You're reading it Rav Huna.
And then isn't that where Tosafos is quoting?
Yeah, the Kanim Bozel is certainly in Rav חייא, not in Rav Huna.
Saying Rav Huna, you think before that?
Where? No, the Maskal comes from Rav Chibarav. Chibarav Amakol Halakol feed Kanim Bozel. That's where the Maskal is. If it isn't, he should have added another word to indicate such.
Rav Huna Amar Lakol Fi Masha Gitar.
Right. That's like Yod El Yoina. Right.
Amar Kol Fi Masha Gader Xiya Barav Amar Kol Lefi Dmei Kohen Bozel. Yeah, but that's so that a different type according to Hakol.
Say it again.
This is we're trying to define what Hakol is, right?
Yeah, if the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav חייא, what the Hakol is about Rabbi Yossi.
Right, but then further on, Rav Huna. I have Rav Huna. This
is all that's in Rav Huna. So let's put the question there. It will still be the same problem. But why would he anyway? The question is the same for either. Doesn't make a difference.
So meaning that if you define Hakol either as Lefi Mashagader or as Dmei Kohen Bozel.
Yeah.
So Lefi Mashagader would be what he actually spent.
Right. Which is what the Ramban said is equal to assuming that's Yod El Yoina because it's Sada Soyalita. Right?
So according to the Tosafos' question that the same should apply. Why does the owner have to pay only to make Kohen Bozel, which is less than the improvement or the expenses?
Yeah, it's definitely less than the expenses, but that's okay because it's not Yod El Yoina. But it's got to be less than why is it less than the improvement? Now, I'm not sure why the improvement is any higher than the Kohen Bozel. Because I have a fancier wall around my property. The wall doesn't belong to me. Plus, the wall does not belong to me.
Well, we say that you only have to pay half if the wall does belong to you and is part of your property, no?
Well,
Otherwise,
we had the Rabbi Yosan and the Rambam, which says it has to be on my property. But Tosafos never said anything like that. The Gemara never said anything like that.
but once you're paying for half, then it's half yours, no?
It'll become mine. But I'm not paying for
Yeah.
half, according to חייא. I'm paying to make Kanim Bozil. Not even paying half.
Well, whatever we require you to pay, you will own half of that for that price.
Including the ground upon which it is. But then I would only own a certain percentage of the wall also. Right? So the amount I own the wall is commensurate to the increase in value either way, whatever I pay.
Well, if we don't calculate the actual ground, but the actual, just the wall, just the materials, whatever we're asking you to pay, you acquire
Percentage, whatever the percentage is. Right?
percentages, similarly 50%, because that's what we're
No,
obligating
I'm
you.
paying to make Kanim Bozil. So I'm paying half to make Kanim Bozil. So whatever that expense is, vis-a-vis how much you actually paid, I own that much. So maybe it's 10% of the whole wall if you made a really fancy wall.
Maybe.
So either way, the increase in my value is only 10% of that wall. The increase in the value is only what I'm paying, if that's how we're measuring the value.
So the expense, we could say that Lefi Mashagadu, that's the expense. Whatever he used stone, he used brick, whatever he used, that's
clear.
the expense.
That's clear and that's easy.
Right. So let me say, why is the shvach, why is the actual improvement greater than the Mekon in Brazil?
That's my question, yes. In fact, and the Melchamas Hashem validates the question because Hitaka says that that's Rav Chiya's opinion. The reason why Rav חייא says Mekon in Brazil because that's the value. And Yodel Tatayna. My question on Tosafos is why do we assume it's less? And I had this question as soon as I read the Tosafos, even before I got to seeing the Melchamas Hashem, but I only saw now. I don't know. There's another two interesting Tosafos in here, but I don't want to spend too much time on this sugya. We're going to go next week in Mitzvah Hashem to the sugya of Runya and Ravina. Get into that sugya for a little bit. Maybe we'll do that for Wednesday and Thursday next week, and then we'll go on to the next mission already.
Okay.
All right, Shkoyach, thanks for this. This was very geschmack.
Hashem, thank you.
Gute Nacht.
Good night.